Hi, I'm Patrice Vecchione. I'd like to welcome you to my corner office, the corner of my little house in Monterey, California. I'm the author of the recently published book, My Shouting Shattered, Whispering Voice, A Guide to Writing Poetry and Speaking Your Truth. And I'd like to begin by reading to you from the introduction to the book. But before I read even that much, I'd like to read what I start the book off with, a quote from Adrienne Rich, who said, "The necessity of poetry has to be stated over and over to those who have reason to fear its power or to those who still believe that language is only words." And that quote begins my book because that's very much my orientation to poetry, that poetry in particular of all the forms is a lot more than just language. The introduction to my book is called A Chewed Up Pencil in the Back Pocket of an Old Pair of Jeans. Once upon a time, a girl lost her voice. She had been treated cruelly, and for years she said not a yes or a no. What she couldn't say out loud, the unspeakable and the everyday things, she turned into poems. And that led her later to reclaim her voice anew aloud. Once upon another time, a boy kept a journal that he filled with his life's challenges and triumphs. When his father found the notebook, he read it, and in front of the boy, he set a match to his son's words. That would have kept many from writing again. This young man bought a new notebook, wrote a new poem, and after memorizing it, tore the page out and set a match to it himself. At the top of the next page, he wrote the first word of his new poem. If his father were to read it, there would be nothing to anger him. The notebook, with the mostly missing words, later became the young poet's first book. Such was the determination inside him. Our lives are made of stories and poems, from the tiniest incidents to the biggest. Early childhood experiences. There's hitting your first home run, the private embarrassment of cheating on a test and not getting caught, a Me Too moment. Writing poems is a way to uncover what most needs to be uncovered, to loosen the tongue in solitude, to make connections that can't be made in conversations. Poems are made of questions more than answers, and they can withstand sudden shifts of direction, may be full of contradictions. Poems don't shy away from incomplete sentences. A poem of no more than 3 lines can defy darkness or change the wind's direction. The poet Kwame Davis said, "Poetry offers us the capacity to carry in us and express the contradictory impulses that make us human." Once upon another time, there was a kid who was overwhelmed by her life. She needed a way to reckon with her confusions, those knotted and gooey ones that pressed against her. Her father's daily shouting in Italian and English made his eyes spin. And when he called her an idiot, she wanted to disappear. She was embarrassed by the slurred speech of her mother's drunken public outbursts. At school, she felt out of place, as though the oddities of her home life were visible. In front of most others, she was quiet, but inside her head, loud bees were swarming. One morning, during her first year of high school, wearing the brown felt hat with the beaded sunburst on the front, the hat she wore even to bed, her long hair falling down the length of her back, she walked out of class, giving no reason. Behind the music building, late morning winter sun leaned warm against the wall, and she sat down. Someone was playing drums inside a classroom, but the girl was listening to something else. Something within her, and it was persistent. Pulling out a small notebook and a chewed-up pencil from the back pocket of her jeans, the girl began to write. Unlike the dread and drudgery that came with classroom writing, this was nearly effortless. It was as if the poem were writing her. She read it once, satisfied, she returned to class. That girl was me. For a long time, my poems stayed hidden in notebooks. I wrote to make something out of what scared me, to separate myself from the crazy instability of my home life and the sense of not fitting in at school. To say how it felt, I wrote to save my life. Not for a long time did I have an inkling that within me there were books to be written, that I could become a writer. That was lifetimes ago, really. That books have my name on the spine continues to amaze and delight me. When a first copy of a new book arrives in the mail, I'm glad you can't see me, because I dance around the house holding the book in my arms like a small partner. When I see a book of mine on a shelf in a bookstore, I touch the place where my name is printed. In poems, paragraphs, and chapters, I discover that I know more than I thought I did, that I'm braver and more daring than I ever believed I could be, that I'm not as different from others as I once believed, and maybe, most importantly, that I'm not the idiot girl my father said I was. My book is in 5 sections. It talks about things like what's unwritten, what's yet to come out, about listening deeply, the 5 senses, and then it has practical things about syntax and voice and style and the editing process and creating a poetry manuscript, getting your work out into the world. And the book concludes with a lot of resources that you might find helpful. So what about writing right now at this time? It's a fearful time. Rarely have we ever lived so faced with death on a daily basis, at least most of us, with the possibility of death. And I think this gives us an option of living in negativity and fear, or turning this very vivid time into a creatively productive one. What I love best about writing is the experience of surprise. When I sit down to write, no matter how clear an idea I have of what I want to say, I never write what I anticipated I would. I'm always surprised by what I write. And at a certain point, I realized that I kind of had to write, that in order to be most who I am, to give most fully to others, that writing was imperative for me. The book is made up of a lot of chapters, very lot of them, but they're all very short, and you could pick it up and read a chapter and then put it down. Think about what you read, sit down and write. Here's the 17th chapter. It's called, "And If You Don't Write." One morning when I was at my desk, the words kept rebuffing me. Not one that touched the paper was even close to what I wanted to say, and doubt gnawed at me as though I were its bone. "It's not like you're getting paid to be here," I said to myself, "so don't write." I walked away from the notebook, feeling much relieved. I really didn't have to write now, did I? I took a deep breath and thought about what I'd do with the suddenly open hours, until the impulse to write called me back. Apparently it was going to be one of those days, damned if I did and damned if I didn't. Pushed to the edge, I relinquished control. And here's what came. If I don't write, I won't die. My eyes will still see what they see, this heart too. Blood won't stop its pulse work. Feet won't forget the forest is for wandering through. Nor will I be less inclined to comment on the world's beauty. If I don't write, my imagination won't stop its daily, moment-by-moment insistence, not to make something out of nothing, but to make a frog from a prince, a window out of a wall, a day out of despair. Without a pen in hand, a poem in mind, phrases turned over in my mind, my imagination won't harden into the gray, flat matter of reason. I won't forget to proclaim. Still, I'd be a diviner. Or will I? If I don't write, will I lose my way, give up my song, forgetting its value, speech that for years I begged for, clumsily stuttered toward, then thrust my way into, and occasionally found waiting at my doorstep ready? If I don't write, will my imagination atrophy and like an unused limb dry up and wither? Will a hard shell form around my rib cage, a gnarled claw take over my pen-holding hand? Yes, if I don't write, my eyes will become veiled and darkly hooded. Scales will bend my back. My tongue will thicken into a knot that not even the nimblest sailor will be able to untie. And you? What about you? What if you don't write? So what does this writing do for us? It does a lot of things. It does a lot of things for me, my students, and I found this to be true for many years. I had a student once, and I asked her to write about a memory. She wanted to write about the day her brother died. She said to me, I don't remember anything about it. So I said, after class, go home and write all the things that you don't remember. And she looked at me, thinking that I was nuts. I knew I wasn't. Sometimes I don't know that, but at that moment I knew. She said, what do you mean? I said, well, right, I don't remember what day it was. I don't remember where I was standing. I don't remember how I felt or who told me the news. A few hours later, she sent me an email. The subject bar was, I remember. She had remembered all of the details of her experience by starting with where she was, with a sense of not knowing. And that's something writing can give to us. It gives us back our life. There are so many experiences in my own life that if I hadn't written them down, they would be gone from me. There are only so many things that we can remember. Certain events, though, have nuggets of gold that can carry us through the lean times. And when troubling things happen, like we're living through now, these troubles, writing can be a way to come to grips with what's confusing and can free us from holding on to the difficult. If we write about something pleasurable, we make it linger. Also, something that writing does for us is feeling thought. It's all this invisible whirlwind sometimes in us. And if you write it down, you take what is not understandable, what's confusing or overwhelming, what's frightening, and all that material then is on the page. And you can read it back. You could even burn it, like the boy did with his poems. It almost doesn't matter. What happens as a result of writing is that you get a little distance from what is overwhelming. You can make a separation from it. And then if you develop it, you actually can make art from it. And that's the best part. So I was asked to tell you who some of the poets are that inspire me. Two of my favorite poets have been for a long time. Pablo Neruda, the Chilean poet, for his use of imagery, how he makes me see the ordinary anew. He has a poem many of you may be familiar with, an ode to his socks. I wouldn't have thought till I read Neruda to write a poem about socks. The poet William Stafford, he uses everyday language. It's like, also with him, though, the style is completely different. He takes the unexpected things and turns poems out of them. Stafford's work is very plain-spoken. Neruda's work is rich, lush in its imagery. And the poet Ellen Bass has a new book out. It's called Indigo, and I wanted to read you just a few lines from her poem called Indigo. That anyone is born, each precarious success from sperm and egg, to zygote, embryo, infant is a wonder. And here I am alive, almost 70 years, and nothing has killed me. Her book is just out from Copper Canyon, and I encourage you to get it. My book is for young adults through adults, and the bookstore asked me to talk a little bit about how kids approach poetry differently than adults do. The main thing is a lack of self-criticism. I have a chapter in the book on the internal critic. And if you can free yourself from the voice that's judging you when you're writing, you will get to your best work. Young children especially don't have much of a critic, at least most of the kids who have not been traumatized, who feel a sense of playfulness. And that's really what we need to get back to in our writing in order to write in original ways. And I was also asked to talk about how to infuse a love of poetry in kids. And it made me think, looking over at my bookshelf, of an anthology I edited a number of years ago called Whisper and Shout Poems to Memorize. If you learn a poem by heart, you'll never be lonely again. Maybe a slight exaggeration, but really not much. I have maybe a dozen poems in my head. Maggie and Millie and Molly and May went down to the beach to play one day. For whatever we lose, like a you or a me, it's always ourselves we find at the sea. That's E.E. Cummings. Was also asked to tell you what I'm reading these days to feel connected and hopeful and comforted. And I want to share with you two books. This is Native Country of the Heart by Cherie Moraga. And this book is called Vittoria Colonna, Renaissance Woman. I love to read memoir, particularly memoirs by other women, because they show me examples of how other women have made it through this life. These two writers, one 21st century writer, playwright, former professor at Stanford, writes about growing up Chicana in the United States, what her experience is like. It's very much like poetry. The book, the biography rather, not memoir, of Vittoria Colonna is about a Renaissance woman who was a poet and in Rome. She's from Rome. And going back those hundreds of years, I'm reading right now about the Salt Wars and her desire to be a nun. And so you see from reading the work, for me, the work particularly of other women, how they have dealt with conflict and strife and survived. I hope that you will get out your pencil and allow yourself to be surprised by what you write. I would like to conclude by giving you my rules for writing. These apply to all creative writing, poetry in particular. What you write doesn't have to make sense. Let yourself be surprised by your own ideas. Trust your imagination. There is no wrong way to do this. In a first draft, spelling, neatness, punctuation, none of that is relevant. All that's relevant is catching the thoughts, disparate, contradictory, confusing, chaotic, whatever it is. Capture them, put them down, then put what you've written in a drawer, leave it there to rise like bread dough, and come back a little later, read it to yourself, and I bet you'll be surprised. Maybe you'll want to read it to somebody else. If you purchase a copy of my book from the Boulder Bookstore, I will make and send you one of these book plates, and I will sign it to you. Thank you so much for being with me in my little office on a sunny afternoon in Monterey, California. I wish you strength and courage and good health and, of course, poetry.